People always say racism begins at home, and sometimes it does, because racism, bigotry, and prejudice are taught. I am not going to pretend children are born knowing how to hate people they have never met. But I also do not believe racism always begins with the parents. I know that because before college, racism was not something I sat around thinking about. I did not grow up carrying racial resentment, and I did not come from a family that taught me to hate white people or anybody else. That darkness came later. It came when I started college. And that is an uncomfortable thing to admit because I could have been that person. And for a while, I was. At least in the deepest, darkest recesses of my soul. I could have kept going down that road, purely emotional and convinced my anger was righteous because I had the history of people who looked like me on my side. Maybe I could have even been in the Carmelo Anthony crowd demanding justice for him while losing sight of Austin Metcalf, the teen who was fatally stabbed. Because once emotion takes over, facts become secondary to whatever story feels morally satisfying. I hate to think that could have ever been me, but blind emotion can make people do some crazy things. I grew up Southern with a mother who did not have a racist bone in her body. I did not grow up in a home where people sat around teaching us to hate white people or anybody else. So when that darkness eventually showed up in me, it did not come from my family. It came from school. And no, I am not naming the college because that is not the point. Honestly, I think this kind of thing happens in a lot of places. In high school, we learned about slavery. We knew it was evil, horrific, and part of American history. College was different, not because slavery was taught, but because it was framed in a way that made living white people feel like inherited villains. The problem was not being taught about slavery. Slavery should be taught truthfully, fully, and without apology. Children should also understand that slavery was not isolated only to Black people, because human history is full of cruelty, conquest, and wicked systems. The problem is when painful history is taught without wisdom, balance, or moral clarity, because then history stops being a lesson and becomes emotional programming. The stories I heard were devastating. Any person with a heart, regardless of skin color, would have felt anger, sadness, and disgust because the atrocities were real and the pain was real. I suppose this is why some white people go so hard against racism and injustice. People with good hearts do not want others to suffer, whether that suffering is real or perceived. But the people who committed those acts were not standing in front of me. So that anger started drifting toward people who looked like the people in the stories. That's how it happens. Nobody has to hand you a robe, teach you a chant, or directly tell you to hate somebody. Sometimes all they have to do is load you with pain, point your emotions toward a group of people, and let resentment do the rest. I did not walk around saying it out loud, and thank God for that, but it was there. It sat inside me quietly and festered because I had been given outrage without a place to put it. And when pain has no wisdom attached to it, it will start looking for a target. After college, I met a Jamaican couple and we talked about injustice, the system, the man, and all the things people talk about when they are trying to explain why life feels unfair. Later, they had a cookout, and the wife invited a white female friend who came with her white husband. I will never forget that moment because her husband was clearly a Harley guy. Long hair, bandana, and black leather jacket to prove it. It was all black people there. So when this one white couple walked in, the dark little thing inside me immediately started talking. Why are they here? Are they feds? I am not joking. That is where emotional thinking can take you. You start seeing enemies where they're just people, and you start assigning motives to strangers who have done nothing but walk into a room. Everything seemed fine at first, except for the darkness exchange happening inside my mind. Then somehow the conversation turned to finances, and the white man said something like, well, I can't get a loan as a white man because they give all the loans to y'all. And everyone just stopped. Dead silence. Truly dead silence. You could have honestly heard a pin drop because here we were at a cookout, a black cookout at that, and this man had the audacity to bring his darkness directly into the light, while I sat there festering in mine. That moment could have gone left quickly, but suddenly all the black folks started laughing. We were like, we get the loans? We thought y'all got the loans. And he started laughing too. That day changed something for all of us. To this day, both he and his wife became my friends. Even now, I get goosebumps thinking about it because that was the moment the spell broke. We had both been told the other side had the advantage, and none of it was true. We had both been handed a grievance and trained to look at ordinary people as if they were the source of the problem. That is when I understood divide and conquer in a way I had never understood it before. They get your children, feed them agenda, garbage, and ideology, and parents assume their kids are just learning math, history, science, and reading. But what they may actually be learning is how to hold animosity quietly until it eventually breeds hatred. My mother would have been shocked to know what had been planted in me because I did not come home and announce, hey mom, school is teaching me to resent white people now. In my opinion, most parents are not sitting at home teaching their children to hate other races. A limited few are, absolutely. But I think most parents would be stunned to learn what their children are absorbing from school, culture, media, and social platforms. Sometimes the lesson is not in the textbook. Sometimes it is in the framing. That is why, when Trump directed the Secretary of Education to take steps toward closing the Department of Education to the extent allowed by law and returning authority over education to states and local communities, I understood why that mattered. In my opinion, the federal education bureaucracy has not been doing its job. When too many institutions seem more interested in producing emotionally reactive activists than wise, thoughtful citizens. That does not mean history should be erased, slavery should be softened, or children should be lied to so everybody can feel comfortable. Tell the truth. Tell all of it, but tell it with wisdom. Teach children how evil works, how power corrupts, how systems become wicked, and how ordinary people can be manipulated into doing monstrous things. But do not teach a black child to look at white people and see slave masters. Do not teach a white child to look at a black child and carry guilt for sins they did not commit. Do not teach children to inherit resentment when you could be teaching them discernment. Because when you do that, you create adults who pick a side based on race before they look at the facts. You create people who would look at a case like Carmelo Anthony and Austin Metcalf and run straight to the racial narrative instead of asking the first and most important question: what actually happened? I could have been that nut job. I could have been so emotionally captured that I ignored the murdered child and centered the person who killed him because the racial story felt more powerful than the facts. That is ugly to admit, but it is true, and it is exactly why I am serious about this. Racism and bigotry are stupid. They are spiritually ugly, intellectually lazy, and socially destructive. Every group has suffered because human history is full of pain, conquest, cruelty, betrayal, and evil. But most people walking around today are not your enemy. There are evil and corrupt people in the world. There are race hustlers, grievance merchants, manipulative institutions, and loud fools who should have never been put in front of a microphone or camera. They need to go sit down somewhere. But ordinary people need to talk to each other again. Parents need to ask their children what they are learning, what they believe about people who do not look like them, and whether resentment has taken root in their hearts. If you find that darkness within, do not ignore it. Bring it into the light where it can be healed. Then sit down with someone outside your immediate circle, in a safe place. Not for a lecture or fake diversity exercise, but for an actual conversation where real people can be honest, heard, and human again. Because this shit needs to be nipped in the bud. The easiest way to conquer people is with division. Keep them angry at each other, and they will never look up long enough to see who keeps feeding them the anger. At this point in our country, we need to come back together, and we really do need to make America great again in the truest sense of that phrase, by bringing back the camaraderie that existed when people could disagree without acting like disagreement made someone evil. So I want to hear from you. Have you ever carried the darkness of bigotry or racial resentment in your heart and something finally snapped you out of it? Was it a conversation, a friendship, a moment of honesty, or one person who made you realize the story you had been told was not the whole truth? That is where healing starts. Not with pretending history did not happen, and not with teaching children to hate people alive today because of it. Healing starts when we bring the darkness into the light and tell the truth without turning each other into enemies. If this made you think, like the video, share your experience in the comments, and stay in the conversation. Until then, travel well.